Good afternoon and welcome to this week's episode of Safety Culture Solutions, brought to you by Safety Culture Strategies. Each week we focus on our podcast different pieces and facets of safety culture. Lots of focus on leadership, because that's kind of where it begins, along with communication, because if you have great leadership without great communication, it's probably not going to bode real well for you. And likewise, looking at continuous improvement, employee engagement, all these fun parts of this. And I did say fun because when you get safety culture aimed the right direction in a positive manner, you truly can have a great time with us. I am so thrilled to have with us today Bobby Jones, who owns Bobby Jones and Associates. He's based out of Texas, and he is the developer and an owner of the Behavior Justification root cause analysis methodology and is a sole source provider. He's been training and consulting using behavior justification for 35 years in a wide range of industries and government agencies to understand and successfully control processes causing quality, earnings, injuries, and other business-related issues. In 1996, Bobby became interested in the concepts incorporated in behavior justification. He had worked with Dr. George Yancy, PhD, a professor at Austin State University in Texas, who tutored Bobby on the concepts of cognitive and Gestalt psychology to create the critical thinking skills utilized in behavior justification. The theories of Dr. Dan Peterson, and anybody in the safety world, we all know Mr. Peterson, directly influenced Bobby's efforts. The technology is a logic rule-guided thought process that allows the trained user to explain any problem with a Gestalt cause and effect model. The model interfaces human behaviors, including human error, now you got my attention, with mechanical and operation systems. It can be used as a communication tool and also be measured to mathematically express the organizational processes that produce the problem. Results can also assist with reducing potential for a similar event in the future through critical thinking skills. Mr. Jones, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. Welcome aboard, sir.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm really happy to be here. I appreciate it.
And I've had the pleasure, you and I've yacked a lot and done some of the Zoom and the Skype and all the different options out there. And it really intrigues me what you stood up. You've been at it for many years now. And as I understand, part of the basis for this, you and your team vetted over 3,000 perception surveys to kind of help stand up this model. And as we get into that, I got to ask you, this was a lot of effort to stand up, and you're meeting with PhDs and talking to some of the best in the business. That's what I would call a fairly heavy lift, sir. What caused you to do all this? Number one, I'm glad you did. What caused you to do it?
Well, I've been self-employed my entire life almost. My wife and I have been married for 50 years, so we've just owned and operated several different businesses. And in the 1980s, we invested in a software company that was, attempting to develop some artificial intelligence, which was, way back then, it was not what it is now. And that investment didn't work out very well, but it actually got me interested, which is one of the things my wife puts up with. She's let me start several businesses, thank goodness. And so it was a path I had no idea how rough it was going to be to start, trying to manufacture or develop a process from scratch. But we stuck with it, and you mentioned Dr. Yancy, who tutored me in cognitive psychology and Gestalt modeling, and I had the really good fortune of working sort of shoulder to shoulder with Dan Peterson in the 90s. I was hired by the electric company for Arizona to develop training for them, and they were going through a process that was called re-engineering, which is just a horrible thing for an organization to go through. And I was there teaching this process and leading RCAs, trying to understand and explain why the new business protocols weren't operating correctly. Mm-hmm. And Dan Peterson was hired to implement a safety culture. So I just, we got to talk a lot, and I was developing this program, doing those surveys you mentioned earlier, and he really woke me up to the concept of behavior and safety. And I have to back this up just a little bit because one of your questions we talked about earlier is, you know, what actually got me interested in safety. And
Exactly.
this goes back to my dad was a senior vice president for a company called Laterno. And Laterno manufactures offshore drilling platforms and those great big trucks with
Yep.
10-foot tall tires, you know. And so my dad had a strong work ethic. So from the time I was in high school, I had a part-time job after school. You know, I was either a welder's helper, a mechanic's helper, worked in the parts department, always a helper, fork truck driver, you name it. And in 1966, I was thinking about this after we talked the other day. I was working there one day. I was going to Kilgore College at the time, working in the afternoons. And I was working one day, and two of my mentors that were mechanics got killed in a crane accident. And I was
Oh,
there,
my stars.
you know, and saw them take them down and move them from the site. And it just like is, you know, branded in my brain what that
Yes.
looked like. And I was 19 years old.
Yes.
So that sort of set a foundation for me, and even I use that those concepts in my insurance business for, you know, thinking about risk and things like that. And when I started developing this process, it's a foundation piece that I know those two. I mean, those two guys. One of them knew me from the time I was born, and it was just you know, it was traumatic. So I had to.
Yeah.
That's where it all started. And then after my wife agreed to let me start this business, and I had to get all this tutoring and training, and I think I mentioned this before. I don't have the educational background for it. I don't mind, you know, hiring somebody to teach me. I'm a college dropout. I still study a lot. You know, I believe in that. All my kids are educated, and my grandkids. But you know, it's a different time in history, and so. Working through that, and with Dan Peterson's influence, and I took what I call the Thomas Edison approach. I'll try anything once. I tried a lot of different things. Most of them didn't work. But when you find something that works, hey, you latch onto it and you know, keep going. So over, you know, it was years to get this thing to a point where it is what it is. And I'll be honest, every day is a learning activity for me because I don't know everything there is to know about modeling business processes yet, but I'm trying. So I also had to take a course in Boolean algebra, and I read probably every psychology book you can read, Edward W. Deming and J.M. Duran. So all of those things have influenced me to provide a tool to help people that work in dynamic organizations solve problems. And the tool technically is a critical thinking skill. Now, the program is called Behavior Justification Root Cause Analysis. And, you know, just about everybody thinks they know what root cause analysis is. So
True.
I use that as the name, but I used this term a minute ago. What I teach is a critical thinking skill. And what Dr. Yancy helped me understand and influenced me on was a theory in cognitive psychology called schema theory, which is a theory to explain how does the mind take information in through the senses, how does the mind store it, and then how does the mind use it later for problem solving. And so basically it says when you take some information in through your senses, your mind formats that information into a little schematic. So schema theory. Schema is Greek word. Schema of English is schematic, and so we're talking in layman's terms, not synapses and chemical connections.
Perfect.
Explain how to work with words, and so that information is taken in and stored in these little schematics, schema. And in cognitive psychology, if you're a person and you have somehow managed to develop between 50,000 and 100,000 separate schema about a particular subject, you're deemed an expert. Because when your mind processes that information, it's unconscious and it's parallel processing. So it's stuff you don't have to think about. And so with Dr. Yancy's tutoring, I figured out a way to take information about any event, it doesn't matter what kind of organization it is, and format it into a model that mimics that schema theory. So every model that's constructed using this process, it's rule guided, math driven, is basically mimicking how the mind works. So everyone that's in this interview now has been doing this since the day you were born. It is a human learning process.
So
My role.
Just real quick, because so one of the things I've just been fascinated with over the years is cognitive bias. So does this kind of contribute to the schematic you're talking about in our brain?
Well, it could, unless you have rules to follow. So everyone, has bias. I mean,
yes.
Every decision you make is based on everything that's happened to you in your life up to right before you make that decision.
Exactly.
So I put together a little rule-guided process that builds in deductive reasoning, train people how to use facts, and we define a fact as a piece of information that has objective reality, which means it's true in all cases. It takes a little training to do that. And then this little 4-rule process that you follow allows you to take the facts, build them into the model, and then one of the rules allows you to perform a truth function on the answer. So it is, I've heard judges say, I can be totally objective. I want to hear the case because I'm an objective person. Nobody can be totally objective. A tool. So this is a tool that allows people to organize problems, remove the bias, and end up with a explanation of a process that produced an unwanted event. So when you get it down to process, when you're talking about organizations, an organizational process is simply a combination of conditions and actions that develop over a time flow to produce a product.
There you go.
So all I teach people how to do is unlock this unconscious process you have. Let's elevate it to a conscious level. Let's use it for group problem solving. And then we end up with explanations that actually can convert into a mathematical process. And so it creates a whole new series of analysis that aren't available in other programs. This is one thing that sets us apart from other programs.
And so when you talk about mathematical process, it sounds like now there's a way to quantitatively be able to measure some of this.
I've lost my audio, Mike.
Hey, I can hear you. Uh-oh, you can't hear me? Stand by just a second, man. I think we have an electronic wiring connection somewhere out on that fancy Ethernet internet thingy. We'll tell you what, we're going to go to commercial right now. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. There's more critical thinking coming up with Bobby Jones and Associates. Stand by. We'll be back.
Safety Culture Strategies provides world-class safety culture and safety program management consultative services for clients throughout the United States. Whether your company is pursuing Voluntary Protection Program STAR designation, ISO 45001 certification, or considering a comprehensive review of your current safety programs and processes, Safety Culture Strategies brings hands-on experience combined with a unique perspective that readily translates from senior management to task-level personnel. This collective skill set provides you with a very insightful health check of your overall safety management system that can also assist with reducing injuries and attrition, as well as increasing profitability. Safety Culture Strategies is also certified to provide Ziegler Institute employee engagement training and leadership coaching. When combined with established relationships with federal and state regulators, Safety Culture Strategies is uniquely positioned to assist the safety culture efforts of any company. For additional information, visit www.scstrat.com or call us at 702-780-1410. After all, every company has a safety culture, but is it the culture you want?
Hey, we're back. I think Bobby's out there with us too. We're going to get him pulled up here in a second. We're talking about critical thinking skills. And Bobby, we got to apologize. There's while the wiring's not to our advantage. I was asking, so with this being able to have this mathematical expression, it indicates to me that you also have the potential to measure the difference in a given system or process exponentially.
Yes, you can. It turns out once you can convert the words in a model to a mathematical process,
Yeah.
you're no longer even looking at the words, you're dealing with causal connections.
Beautiful.
And so you can measure how much each root cause contributed to an event. And so root causes, as a matter of fact, all root causes that can be controlled are actually behaviors. They're either organizational behaviors or individual behaviors, depending on how the model flows. So
Yep.
to answer your question, you can actually, as a matter of fact, reducing frequency becomes a product of process control because each model represents a specific process that produced the unwanted event. So in theory, if one understands a process well enough to explain it, one can control it. And so that's one of the
Beautiful.
things that quantification allows you to do and measure how much control. And then because there's quantification involved, you can, in a roundabout way, measure management participation
Wow.
by
There you
understanding
go.
how the management system is
Beautiful.
developing control over policies and procedures that are allowing or causing unwanted events to occur.
Well, and for our viewers, just to let you know, this is not Bobby's first rodeo. I think, Bobby, you got to help me now. I think you've taught this over 1,200 classes and still counting.
Yeah, a week before last, I taught my 1,224th class. Most of my classes are 3 to 5 days. So
Wow.
that's a lot of years to get to that point.
That's a lot of
I've
years.
learned something every class I taught.
Good for you. And you know, I'm also talking because to me, one of the great indicators of the success of a company, and more importantly to me, the viability of their product, for lack of a better phrase, in your case, technique for these critical thinking skills. You have some clients that you've had for more than 10 or 15 years, I believe.
Yes, I have a lot of clients I've had more than 10 years, but my longest running client, the city of Austin, Texas, actually owns their own electric utility. It's called Austin Energy. It's one of the largest public utilities in the United States, and I've worked for them for 19 years. And so, my typical, as a matter of fact, I've been in business so long. The way I actually lose customers is there's more than one, maybe 2 or 3 management changes go on in the C-suite while I'm there working. And, it's just one of those deals where every once in a while I'll wake up, I don't know anybody in the C-suite anymore because they've all moved on. And that's typically how I lose business. So you're always trying to get some new business. But
yeah.
I maintain that because after I do the training, it's just the start because it's an ongoing mentoring, coaching process after you've gone through the training. And so that helps develop rapport also, but it also helps me make sure the process is being used correctly.
There you,
and it's a constant mentoring.
You know, it's ironic. I was talking with Larry Wilson yesterday that owns SafeStart, very powerful tool, and we're talking about behavior-based safety. And one of the challenges years ago is some companies, they thought they went to like somebody's class for like an hour, and now they're going to try to teach them themselves. So what you offer is also unique for all the viewers. So when they bring you on board and you come in, you do the classes, you're available to them after the class versus just disappearing, for lack of a better phrase.
Always. So I've taught five classes this year so far, and 2 of them were brand new clients. And I've already had multiple phone conversations with those 2 clients because, they're just in that learning curve.
Sure.
I tell them at the last day of the class, you're just like the guy that graduated from medical school. You're a doctor, but I don't want you doing brain surgery on me because you haven't had a lot of practice. Everybody gets a laugh out of that, but that's the point I'm trying to make. I've just given you like a lot of information in these last 3 to 5 days, and you have no practical experience other than what we did in the class. So I know for it to be a success, I've got to be around to help. And when you're a small business, you can't afford many failures. So you work really hard for them all to be a success.
Well, good for you. And recently I was interviewed with one of the digital magazines on safety, and I talked to him. I said, I kind of have a little parallel here with someone who graduated with their bachelor's or even their master's in safety. If they hadn't had a lot of field time yet, you want to have somebody who can kind of mentor and coach them a little bit so they understand how you really apply it successfully.
I agree 100%. And I've had the good fortune. I have done a lot of work with safety professionals. As a matter of fact, almost every company, to get started in a new client, we usually start with the safety group because they're the most organized and
Good
they have a
point.
mission.
Yes.
Exactly. And then it bleeds over, other parts of the organization start asking, well, how did y'all do that? How'd you get that answer out of that end result? And so that's how the business grows. So I love working with safety professionals. The bad part is one of these days I'm going to stop and count how many fatalities I've worked on, but it's way too many. It's somewhere near 100, and that's just a small amount, compared to what goes on in the real world. But that's the bad part of working with safety. Go ahead.
And I'm with you, Bobby. Just like yourself, I can still to this day recall my feelings, just emotionally how it impacted me when I had to respond to a fatality, or I got in the middle of a major accident investigation for a client and they'd lost somebody. It's just, those kind of stick with you. Well, we're going to shift gears here a little bit because we talk about safety culture and having the safety professionals involved. So you've been at this a while. So from your perspective, sir, what's a good technique for leaders to practice to help engage themselves with the people at the task level, the people turning wrenches for a living? What's a good technique for a leader to consider?
Usually when I start my program with a new company, I meet with the upper management and get them to agree that they're going to support the program. Because if upper management doesn't support it, you can do all the training and it just tends to die on the vine. I mean, I learned that early on in my career. And so when I'm working with them, and here's a good example. One of my new clients this year is a major scaffolding company. I mean, they have like 1,500 employees, and the president of that company got training, so he could actually interact with the field people that also went through the training. And so he's following up on my advice because he copied me on an email the other day wanting to know when he was going to see his next model so he could review it. So upper level involvement.
Yeah, great.
But the other thing that I have to make sure they're comfortable with is because sometimes the information that comes out of these RCAs is not comfortable to the upper management. Correct. And so by going through the training and understanding it, then listening objectively, and because you can disagree with what someone comes up with one of these models because it's fact-based and it's rule-guided. So there's plenty of room for constructive conflict and whatever. And so listen objectively and then follow through on the findings because that's where your employee involvement comes from.
Perfect.
You get the employees involved, that is, I think we can agree, you don't change culture, you evolve culture.
Yes.
And in my view.
Yes. You're right on top. And just real quick before we run out of time, a couple more things I always want to touch on. So what type of feedback have you had from a couple of your different clients who have went through your process and then applied it? What have they had to say to you? I
have had just since January, one of the classes I taught was for a company that's a pressure pumping company. They provide the pressure to frack oil wells, and I had the vice president of that company in there. And after the class, he emailed me back and told me, he said, I've had several different trainings on different RCA programs in the last 35 years. This is the most effective I've ever seen.
Really?
That's just the other day. So I get a lot of feedback because we get results.
Perfect.
Positive feedback.
And that's
now, I think we talked about this before. Every once in a while, you'll get a manager that doesn't accept feedback, that's not favorable. And so you get a little
We've
friction.
been there and seen that.
Yes, sir. Right.
And so again,
I would like to point this out. This is a takeaway I'd like at least for people to understand. Excellent. Because I work with a lot of different companies, and I'll talk to a banker, and they'll say, "Well, our problems are special." Or you go to some other, like an oil refinery, and they'll say, "Well, we have very special problems. We're unique." I hear that over and over and over. What I want people to understand is, it doesn't matter what kind of industry you're in. When you look at process that are producing unwanted events, they are all the same. So the process that would produce a fatality is no different than a process that could cause a process upset in a refinery. They're all the same. So once you learn how to break problems down to pure process, you learn this technique, you can work anywhere and help people solve problems.
And so it's kind of a universal application. So towards the end of our shows, and I thank you so much for being with us, you've been asked to speak at a big national safety conference, VPPA, whomever, ASSP, National Safety Council. And so you've shared your thoughts on this critical thinking skills. You've done your 45 minutes. Now you've got your 15 for questions and answers like we all do. What's at the end of all this, and you got leaders in the room with you, you got senior safety professionals, at the end of your talk, and they're applauding your presentation, they're really liking your style, what's 2 or 3 things you want to make sure they write down in their notebook and take back to their office with them?
And I say this a lot. I don't speak to very many large groups, but I speak to a lot of people.
Yep.
And when you're talking to the upper management, it's important that they understand the employees are your subject matter experts. They have the answers. So if you will give them the tool, what they will end up doing is telling you what you need to do to influence their behavior so they can work safer. It's that simple. So if I just get that takeaway, that sort of opens it up for upper managers to say, okay, let's get these people trained and let's start using this information they're developing, because we trust the process they're using to create. It's not biased, it's not opinionated, it's fact driven.
It's fact driven. One more quick question for you before we get done. This has been one of the most intriguing shows I've had in a long time. I can't thank you enough to be with us. So in your 35 years and change doing this, over 1,200 classes, what's your best success story with a client? How the way it changed them for the better?
My best success story would be, I think, I haven't really thought about this. Fortunately, I have a lot of success stories, but
Beautiful.
I do have a client that is a very big exploration and production oil company in Midland, Texas, one of the largest. And when we started there, they had a culture, everybody wanted to be safe, but they didn't have a way to do it. And so I started working with them in 2014. So I guess the success comes from their extremely safe organization. And we've been working there for 7 years.
Wow. Excellent. And I give the analogy because you right on target with safety culture. This is more of a rheostat change versus an on and off switch. The analogy I give, it's like turning a big ocean liner. You keep a lot of pressure on the rudder, and slowly over a period of time, the bow starts to move the way you want.
Exactly.
But that pressure on the rudder, that has to start with the leadership, that they don't back off of it. And I totally embrace your idea that leaders need to understand the employees are your SMEs. I've told my clients, I said, the people carrying the tools for a living are some of the smartest people that you're ever going to have around you. So when you listen to them, and then they realize that leaders are willing to listen to them, then things start to change, right, Bobby?
The information starts flowing and changes occur.
So
Especially if you do this from like even a near miss perspective. Once you get them involved, you react to the near miss, it just opens up the floodgates for information.
And that's phenomenal. And we all talk about, leading indicators, lagging indicators, so many are lagging. But if there's a technique like this that can really give that laser focus on these near miss events, well, from my humble perspective, Bobby, I think you're right on track to helping companies not only get better, have continuous improvement, but they reduce the potential for a significant accident in the future.
I agree with you 100%, and I thank you for your perspective on my program.
But yeah, this Bobby Jones and Associates, you can check him out. Bobby, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Well, the easiest way to find my contact information is just to go to my website. It's www.bobbyd, as in Dwayne, Bobby D. Jones.
Bobby D. Jones,
.com.
right? .com. And You'll see a lot of data there, and he's easy to get a hold of. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that concludes this week's episode. I cannot thank Bobby and Jones and Associates enough. This critical thinking skills technology, it's how I'm going to refer to that he's developed, is stunning. It is worth, I believe, anybody taking a look, checking out what he's doing. In the meantime, you can follow us on our website, www.scstrat.com. Email me at mike@scstrat.com. And you make sure you subscribe, like, and share what we're doing here. And until next time, you guys have a great day and a marvelous, incredible safety culture journey. Take care.